I told you to stay away from here. And I'm not leaving.
I did not sleep at all that night, not because the couch was uncomfortable, but because nothing in that house felt like mine anymore. And every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing Diane's voice repeating that word legally, like it was some kind of shield she could hide behind while erasing my mom. Piece by piece. So by morning, I was already standing in the kitchen before the sun fully came up, watching her move around, like everything was normal. Like she had not just taken an entire life and reduced it to paperwork, and when she noticed me, she smiled in that calm, controlled way that always made me feel like I was the one out of place. "You are up early," she said, pouring coffee into a mug that used to belong to my mom, and something inside me tightened. As I stepped closer, "I need to see everything," I said, my voice steady, even though my hands were not the sale documents, the will, all of it. And she paused just long enough to show me I had hit something, but then she turned back like it did not matter. "Your father handled those decisions," she replied, taking a slow sip. "And he made them for the good of this family," and that word family felt wrong coming from her. "Then call him," I said immediately, and this time she did not hide the irritation in her eyes. "He is busy, Emily. You cannot just demand answers every time you feel emotional." And that was it. That was the moment I realized she was not just explaining things. She was rewriting them, making me sound irrational so she could stay in control. So I leaned forward and said quietly, "I am not emotional. I am asking because something is not right." And she looked at me for a long second before giving a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Maybe," she said softly, "you are asking the wrong question. Because from the beginning, none of this was ever really yours." I stayed in that kitchen long after Diane walked away, her words echoing louder than anything else in the room. None of this was ever really yours, and no matter how many times I replayed it in my head, it still did not make sense because I remembered my mom sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my hand, telling me that everything she had would be mine. One day, she had said it so clearly that I could still hear her voice. So either my memory was wrong, or someone had changed the story after she was gone, and I knew which one felt more real. So I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, dialing my dad before I could talk myself out of it. The line rang longer than usual, and when he finally answered, his voice sounded distant, like he was already somewhere else. "Emily, I am in the middle of something," he said quickly, and that alone made my chest tighten. "I need to ask you something important," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady about the house, about Mom's will, and there was a pause that stretched just a little too long before he spoke again. Diane already explained everything he said, and that was when I felt it not just confusion anymore, but something sharper, something colder. "No, she did not." She said it was never mine. Is that true?" And another silence followed, heavier this time, and I could almost picture him avoiding the question. "It is complicated," he finally said, and those two words made everything worse. Because complicated was not an answer. It was a way to avoid one. Did Mom leave the house to me or not? I pressed, and this time his response came slower, quieter. "I thought she did," he admitted, but the document said otherwise, and my heart skipped documents plural, meaning there was more than one version, more than one truth, and suddenly Diane's calm confidence made sense in a way that sent a chill down my spine, because if there were different documents, then someone had chosen which version I would see and which one I never would. The word documents would not leave my head. It followed me back into the house, into the hallway that no longer smelled like my mom's perfume, into the room that used to be mine, but now felt like a guest space. I had no right to question. And the more I thought about it, the more everything started to shift into place in a way that made me uneasy. Because if there were multiple documents, then someone had decided which version would become real, and that meant control, not coincidence. So I started searching quietly at first, opening drawers that Diane probably assumed I would never touch, going through folders stacked neatly in the home office, every label perfectly organized like she had nothing to hide. But that was exactly what made it feel wrong, because my mom was never this precise, never this polished. And yet here, everything looked curated, intentional, almost rehearsed. And then I found it a folder labeled Property Records Too Obvious to Ignore, and inside were copies of the sale agreement, signatures, dates. Everything aligned so cleanly, it almost felt staged. I stared at my dad's signature for a long moment, tracing it with my finger like I could somehow feel whether it was real, because something about it felt off. Not fake exactly, but distant, like it belonged to a version of him that had already checked out of the decision. And as I flipped through the pages, I noticed the timeline. The house had been listed and sold within weeks of me leaving for college. Faster than anything like this should have happened, faster than my dad would ever move on something that important. And that was when I heard Diane's voice behind me, calm and controlled. As always, you should not go through things that are not yours, she said. And I slowly turned to face her, holding the papers in my hand. I think that is exactly the problem, I replied, my voice quieter now, but sharper, because I am starting to believe this was always meant to look like it was not mine. For a moment, neither of us moved, the air between us tightening, as Diane looked at the papers in my hand, like she was deciding how much of the truth she needed to control next, and then she stepped forward, just enough to close the distance. Without ever raising her voice, those documents are finalized. She said calmly, "There is nothing for you to question," and the certainty in her tone almost worked, almost made me doubt what I was seeing. But then, I remembered the timeline. The speed of the sale, the hesitation in my father's voice, and that quiet feeling returned, the one that told me something had been rearranged long before I walked back into this house. So I shook my head slightly and said, "No, something does not match. This happened too fast." And for the first time, she did not immediately respond, her eyes narrowing just a fraction before she smiled again. Softer, this time almost sympathetic. "You have been away for a while, Emily," she said. "You do not understand how quickly things can move when people are ready to move on." And that word again, move on, like my mom was just a chapter they had closed without me, or when someone makes them move faster. I replied, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything she had said so far, because this time I was not just reacting, I was accusing, and she knew it, but instead of arguing, she reached out and gently took the papers from my hand, placing them back into the folder with a level of care that felt deliberate, controlled, like she was putting the story back where she wanted it. "You are looking in the wrong place," she said quietly, turning toward the door. "If you really want answers, you should be asking why your mother changed things before she passed." And I froze, my heart skipping at the word changed, because that was the first time anyone had suggested that the truth itself had been altered, not just hidden. And as she walked away again, leaving me standing there with more questions than before, one thought became impossible to ignore. What if the version of my mom's will I believed in was not the one that had been used at all? That word stayed with me. Long after Diane disappeared, down the hallway, changed. Not lost, not misunderstood, but changed. And the more I turned it over in my mind, the less it felt like confusion, and the more it felt like intention, because my mom had never been uncertain about anything that involved me, especially not something as important as her will. So if something had been changed, then it was not by accident. It was done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And that thought pushed me out of the house before I could second guess it, because I suddenly remembered something I had not thought about in months. My mom's old attorney, Mr. Brooks, the one she trusted with everything, the one who used to come over for coffee and talk quietly with her at the kitchen table, and if anyone knew the truth, it would be him. So I drove straight to his office across town, my heart pounding harder with every mile, like I was getting closer to something I was not sure I was ready to hear. And when I stepped inside the building, felt exactly the same as I remembered. Calm, professional, untouched by whatever had happened in my house. And when the receptionist asked my name, her expression shifted slightly, like she recognized it, like she had been expecting it, which sent a chill through me before I could even ask why. And a few minutes later, Mr. Brooks himself appeared older than I remembered, but just as composed, and the moment he saw me, his expression softened in a way that felt almost like relief. "Emily," he said quietly, "I was wondering when you would come," and my stomach dropped at those words, because they meant one thing I could not ignore. Anymore, this was never just something I had to figure out. This was something someone had been waiting for me to discover. "Mr. Brooks closed the door behind us and motioned for me to sit, but I stayed standing for a moment, my heart still racing from everything Diane had said, from everything that no longer made sense, and he seemed to understand that because he did not rush me. He simply walked over to his desk and pulled out a thin folder, setting it down carefully like it carried more weight than it looked. "Your mother updated her will shortly before she passed," he said calmly, and the words hit me instantly. Not because they were surprising, but because of how they connected to everything Diane had hinted at. "She changed it," I repeated quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, and he nodded. "Yes, but not in the way you have been told." And that was when the air in the room seemed to shift, because now it was not just about whether something had changed. It was about how, and more importantly, who controlled which version existed. "There are 2 documents," he continued, opening the folder and sliding them toward me. "One was filed and one was not." And my hands hesitated before I reached for them, because I already knew that whatever I was about to see would decide everything. And as I looked down at the first document, it matched exactly what my father had described: everything transferred through him. Everything clean and simple, but when I picked up the second one, my breath caught, because there it was, clear and unmistakable. My name, listed as the sole beneficiary of the house, and everything attached to it exactly like my mom had promised, exactly like I remembered. "This is the version she signed last, Mr. Brooks said, quietly, watching my reaction, but it was never submitted. And I slowly looked up at him, the realization settling in like a weight I could not ignore anymore, because this was no longer confusion or miscommunication. This was a decision someone had made to choose one truth over another. And suddenly, Diane's confidence, her certainty, her control over every conversation, it all made sense in a way that sent a chill straight through me, because she had not just followed the situation, she had shaped it. I did not go home right away after leaving Mr. Brooks's office, because I needed time to think, not about whether the truth was real, but about how I was going to use it, because walking back into that house without a plan would mean walking back into Diane's control, and for the first time since I arrived, I was not reacting anymore. I was preparing. So when I finally stepped through the front door that evening, everything felt different, not because the house had changed again, but because I had. And Diane was in the living room exactly where I expected her to be, sitting calmly, like she had already decided how this story would end. "You were out for a long time," she said without looking up, and I could hear it in her voice, that same quiet confidence, that same assumption that she was still ahead of me. "I needed to understand something," I replied, placing my bag down slowly, and when she finally looked at me, her expression shifted just slightly. Like she noticed something was no longer the same. "And did you?" she asked, and for a second I considered saying nothing, letting the moment stretch. But instead I walked over and set the second will on the table in front of her, not with anger, not with hesitation, just certainty and the moment. Her eyes landed on it. The room changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet way where control slips without warning. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice lower, now sharper, and I met her gaze without backing down. "The place you hoped I would never look," I said, and for the first time since this began, she did not have an immediate response, because this was not something she could explain away, not something she could soften with words. This was the version she had hidden, and now it was right in front of her, undeniable. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized something that made my chest tighten. This was not just a confrontation anymore. This was the moment everything she built started to come apart. For a long moment, Diane said nothing, her eyes fixed on the document like she was calculating something I could not see, and then she exhaled slowly, placing the paper back on the table with a level of care that felt almost deliberate, even if, "That is real," she said quietly. "It does not change what has already been done," and her voice had shifted, not as confident as before, but not defeated either, like she was still trying to hold on to whatever control she had left. But this time I did not step back. I did not question myself. I simply stood there and let the silence settle before answering. It changes everything I said, and my voice surprised even me because it was steady in a way it had never been before. And just then the front door opened behind us, the sound sharp enough to cut through the tension, and my father stepped inside, his presence instantly altering the room in a way neither of us could ignore. His eyes moved from me to Diane and then to the document on the table, and I watched as realization slowly replaced confusion on his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual, and I did not hesitate. "It is the version Mom signed," last I said. And the words hung there heavier than anything that had been said so far, because this time there was no room for interpretation, no way to soften the truth. And for a moment, he just stood there staring at it before looking at Diane, waiting for an explanation she did not immediately give. And in that silence, everything that had been hidden finally surfaced without anyone needing to say it out loud. The decisions, the omissions, the control, all of it. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried something different. Not certainty, not confusion, but something closer to regret. "Why was this not the one we used?" he asked, and Diane looked at him, then at me. And for the first time since I came back, she did not have a clear answer ready, and as the weight of that settled over all of us, I realized something I had not expected winning. This moment did not feel like victory, because the truth had not just exposed what was taken from me, it had exposed everything we had, all failed to see. And standing there between them, I understood that even though the truth was finally out, what came next would not be simple, because some things once revealed do not go back to the way they were.